Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're speaking with Jeff Grogg, founder and managing director of JPG Resources, 70-person strong end-to-end food and beverage innovation and commercialization partner that's worked with some pretty big brands like Caulipower, just to name a few. I think brought, over 2,500 products to market with across a bunch of clients. Jeff spent a bunch of years at Kellogg and Kashi, among others, really just kind of honing his R&D innovation commercialization shops. And I think in addition to guiding JPG, Jeff also runs a CPG focused venture fund, really integrated within the space. So excited to get into it. Jeff, maybe just first off for the a group of listeners that aren't that familiar with JPG, maybe just kind of give us a quick lay of the land just in terms of kind of the origin story and why behind the company and when you started it, core services you guys offer, and then maybe you can kind of close that part out with just kind of a quick overview of the venture fund that you guys have run as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Adam. As far as JPG, our background really spawned out of my experience in Kellogg and Kashi and really not being completely happy with the consulting options that were available. Everybody wanted to work on the fuzzy front end and wanted to do ideas and prototypes, but didn't really want to have to think about, are these products viable in market? Can they ever make money? Can they be manufactured at scale? So, our promise has always been that no matter what kind of fuzzy state we start in, we're going to always have the end in mind. And we're going to know that at some point that innovation does not have value until it's on the shelf and on the shelf in a way that you can be profitable. So that's the way we think and the way we operate. And so all of our team, whether they're in the ideation stage or in production or manufacturing, or if they're in the development team, they're all thinking about how to put all of that together, make the concept work, make the consumer promise work, and make it work in a way that creates a real business. So that's JPG in a nutshell. We do have all of those services end to end from the ideation end and the strategy through product design and development with culinary and food science folks. And then we do a lot of contract manufacturer search and relationship building. And then we can manage the back end for people too with helping run their supply chain. So it's been fun to build this system and to have kind of the only really comprehensive partnership available to the industry. And then, coming out of that also, we had people asking me over a few years, so why do you not have an investment fund? And, kind of eventually found the right partner. So Andrew Reynolds is my GP partner in RCV Frontline, and we invest in early stage brands, usually, a couple million in revenue. So there's a little bit of proof of concept and the founders learned a little and knows what works or doesn't work in their business. And then, we invest to help them double down on what's good about what they're doing and build from there.
In terms of getting a bit more context, just some few examples, some other brands and kind of projects you've worked on. Tell me just a bit about the journey with Caulipower, where I believe you guys partnered with the founders basically from inception all the way to pretty significant scale.
Yeah. I mean, Gail came to us before she started the Caulipower and worked with Pete and our team to kind of frame up the idea and make sure it was going to be commercially viable. We helped design the commercial product that, translate what she had done in her kitchen to something that could be made at scale, and helped find a manufacturer and bring that. We had to help source equipment and design the process at scale to make that work. And then really just worked with her and that team, over a decade since. And so that's been a great partnership the whole way. We did similar things with Health Warrior. When Catterton bought Vans and it was a mess, it was a big turnaround effort. We got deeply involved there and worked with that team, both on operations first and then on innovation. So we've got a long history of kind of being an integrated partner with brands for, a period of growth until sale or until some level of maturity that if they end up running on their own.
I was listening to another podcast you were on, I think a while back, and you were talking about innovation needs a bit of a reset and that disruptive innovation has kind of become a bit of a diluted buzzword to a certain extent. Can you just kind of expand on that a bit to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not that much that's been done in the last decade that's truly disruptive, and a lot of it at bigger companies, they have disruptive innovation departments, but they, when you're constrained to innovate within the brands that you already own or you put other kind of artificial constraints on, or you want something to be big right away, it's hard to actually be disruptive. So there's some of that happens. We worked on the Kraft Heinz, it's called Remix Project, where it's the kind of freestyle of the sauce category where you can customized sauces. That was cool and fun, and it's been successful, but it's rolled out very, very slowly. Kraft Heinz being a large company, it could be disruptive, but it's not moving at the pace of disruption, I would say, in the market. And so even some of those things, it all has to come together. And I think disruptive innovation, sometimes is just a kind of an idea. You look at a brand like Liquid Death, did zero product work, right? There's nothing interesting about their products, but just changing the way people think about water and what they hold in their, how do they feel about what they hold in their hand. Sometimes the disruption comes from just that nuance or that understanding of consumer behavior or psychology.
Yeah.
So I think we can get carried away with trying to be too disruptive. A lot of times scale is in the incremental. You look at, back to Honest Tea, or you look at even the Liquid Death example. It doesn't require much from the consumer to make that little shift, and you can get scale there. So a
Okay.
lot of the more disruptive stuff also sometimes takes a long time to actually disrupt or to actually emerge into disruption.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would it be fair to say that what you see is like some of the most impactful disruption can often come more from operation side versus kind of the brand marketing side in the form of, like process innovation or supply chain innovation or figuring out a new way to make something rather than actually that new like product form factor, the way that you position it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it can come from anywhere. And that's part of why I think also you have to be really thoughtful about what your innovation machine looks like for company by company and what you can leverage. I think of a product like Uncrustables, it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at its core, right? By sealing it, by freezing it, by making it convenient and easy, it's a massive, massive success, right? It's a huge business. And now the protection for Uncrustables is largely that who else is going to invest at scale to make a competitive product that can go head to head. So their disruption was largely in the product format, and the long-term value proposition is largely protected by the asset, the literal physical asset of how you make this thing. So there's a lot of ways to create disruption or to create that one step extra that is the value versus, if somebody was just doing frozen PBJ, it's nothing, but making it into a sealed pocket sandwich is enormous.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think along that front, that's a great example. Obviously, Encrustables, they figure out a way from like operational standpoint to be able to produce millions of those. And I think I've heard you say something along the lines of one of the business biggest risks is not bad ideas, but focusing on ones that scale pretty poorly. If assuming I got that right, how do you go about validating innovation changes like these can actually scale before you invest a lot in it and realize this is actually not something that can actually work once you actually try to commercialize it?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to you need to work with people who know and who understand what this can look like going forward. And either means you as a founder need to go talk to a lot of manufacturers, even if you're making it yourself, or you need to work with somebody who's knowledgeable in the industry who can help you envision how to manufacture at scale. We just see so many products that are designed in-house or even at a tiny co-man where there might be a lot of handwork or other kind of specialty behaviors that are just not scalable or that limit your, as you scale, you would hope that when you go from 1,000 units to 100,000 units to 1,000,000 units, that you can drive costs out of the system. But if you have a poorly designed process,
Yeah,
you'll never get that efficiency and you can never really leverage the scale of being bigger. So, those are the kind of things we want to work with brands to think about as well. If you're going to build $100 million brand, you can start by selling that thing for $8 a unit, but chances are at some point, for that to reach mass appeal, it needs to be $4 or $5 a unit to reach the potential of that idea. And if you can't gain some economies of scale as you grow, most companies don't grow. To that
totally.
point, they become a premium niche specialty item, which is fine. That can be great. I think there's a lot of those kind of businesses that are wonderful businesses, but that may also not be something that you can get investors to back or that investors are going to be happy with. You need to know if you're building a $10 million profitable lifestyle brand, so to speak, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those are great businesses. That's different than building a $100 million brand you're going to exit to a strategic.
Right.
And, I think that in the last decade of the, lots of money flowing in and everything else, too many people didn't understand which they were actually building.
Yeah, that's a great point. Culture innovation is important, especially as a company grows and things can get more bureaucratic and whatnot. In your experience working with so many brands, how can a founder instill this kind of culture into their company from the start, and then really kind of probably what's the harder part is maintain it as the company scales?
Yeah, and it requires different skill sets as you grow, and it requires evolution. In the early days, I think, and the one durable piece is you need to value input from anywhere. You need to value ideas from anywhere. And the best companies do that. The best companies don't care where the idea generated, if it's internal, external marketing or the shop floor. If it's a good idea, you want to get after it. So that's one. And I think that having that requires humility from your leadership. So that is, I think, one common theme. The other is you have to have intense belief in what you're doing. And you want to have a team that not only believes in what you're doing, but trusts each other so that you put each other's ideas to the test. I mean, when I was at Kashi, we grew insanely fast. We went 30x in 8 years. So 25 to 750 in 8 years. And we fought all the time. We had a very intense environment, and and when I say we fought, I mean, in good ways, like in very productive. If we were in a meeting, we had it out. But we trusted each other, so we could talk very bluntly to each other, and then we could go and execute based on the consensus, and knowing that we were making each other better, and there wasn't politics, and there wasn't land grabs going on or anything else. Is just wanting to get the best product out. So those things, I think, are like the kind of culture you want, where there's radical honesty, where there's really aligned vision, but everybody is willing to speak their mind and, just try and get the best outcome. Having said that, I think along that period of growth, and we went through this at Kashi, and I have within JPG or the other business that I've built, you have to add structure as you go. You have to add some process as you go. A lot of times as innovators, we feel constrained by process, but you need good process, helps you innovate better and helps you ensure that that innovation lands again at a profitable, sustainable product. I think we sometimes undervalue process in growth companies.
Yeah, when it comes to product portfolio expansion, it should be a fairly high bar to justify the product, the process of everything it takes to actually bring a product or new SKU to market. From your perspective, what should the journey or process look like that leads just to the decision, to get to that decision that says, yes, this is justified to bring this new SKU to market?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we do find that most companies over innovate. We
Yeah.
actually turn down a lot of work by when people contact us and they say, we want to do a new launch, we want to launch a new line. And our response is, you have no business launching a new line. You need to sell more of what you're doing now, unless you're telling me you're going to pivot your company. If it's not working, fine. But when you're at 2 million, you don't need innovation. Usually you need to grow. And so, and you look at putting the bar category, Kind and Quest or beverage, these brands are 100 million, 200 million, and they only do one thing. They don't have innovations all over the place. So I think that's the first question is, why are you innovating? And does this help your business, or does this just complicate your business? And too many young companies are way too prone to innovation. And you're at 2 million, you've got 14 SKUs across 3 sections of the store is crazy. Those brands almost never make it. They're too cumbersome to work. So that's one. And then I think two is, you need to understand, what does the market want? Does this fit my brand? Does this fit my ability to deliver? Too often we see people doing really disconnected stuff. If you are at a point where you should be doing innovation that's beyond just, one is flavor line extension, and that's a fairly easy kind of, is the trade asking you for a fourth SKU? Is there a clear place for that to go? Can you do something that's minimizes your cannibalization of your own and takes something, adds incremental volume? But when you're talking about like adding a new product line, you really need to weigh your ability to execute that. And ideally, it's still somewhere you can leverage your same sales team, leverage your buyer relationships, when you're jumping aisles in the store, you're essentially, not exactly, but you're starting to create another company. You're certainly creating a new reality that you have to operate in that's far more complicated.
What have you found is key to a new product, new SKU launch that's successful from an on time perspective and on budget perspective?
That's a really good question too, because this is where founders often struggle. And, I mean, big companies too, but I think this comes down to process. This is where I think we've built a machine that works really well at JPG to work through this tension because, my point of view is the best product briefs are often a little bit impossible at the beginning, but you want to work against that high bar and you want to test that. And you want to let's shoot high, let's aim high for what we think we can do. But then somewhere along the line, you have to go, well, I can't make the taste and the nutrition and the margin and the package and everything else that I want. I can't make it work. So something's got to give. And you have to understand your hierarchy when you do that. Like, what's most important for this consumer proposition, for my company, for my concept? Where am I going to give to make this work and make it be viable? Manufacturable, right margin, all that stuff. So, I believe it's healthy to start from a place that may be a little bit unreasonable. That's okay. But you have to have a process then to bring that together to something that is reasonable and is scalable.
Yeah.
And so that requires you doing these cycles of, okay, we're going to lean in on the consumer understanding. We're going to design something that we feel like is the ultimate delivery against the problem we want to solve. And then you have to go, okay, but I have to surround that with the right price point in market and all the other pieces. And so you iterate between creativity and these cycles of what's the next round of product look like and how does it get better and better. And at the same time, you're bringing in the how do I land the cost right? How do I make sure this is manufacturable at scale? And you just have to keep rubbing those sticks against each other to create the fire that ultimately can lift the company. So I think that's the kind of challenge, is that you have to be good at both sides. Most individuals left to their own device are either too willing to just wing it and hope it'll work out, or they're too constrained. So having partnership and process, I think, unlocks that ability to end up in the best spot.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing I've heard you talk about, which I thought was interesting, is that consumers just overwhelmingly value convenience even more than brands may think. I think I heard you reference Rice Krispie treats being a good example. It's like such a simple thing, but clearly they've had a lot of success. Can you kind of expand on what you've kind of, I guess, gleaned over the years around this kind of importance of convenience and reduced friction and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I will say my personality, if I get it wrong, I remember it a lot more than what I get right. And when I was at Kellogg and we were starting to work on a packaged Rice Krispie treats, I remember saying, why would anybody need this? It takes like 4 minutes that anybody with a stove and an arm can make. You stir stuff together. But it was so wrong. Like, as soon as we launched that, Kellogg could not keep up. We actually took like a full page ad in the USA Today. Like, we're doing the best we can. We're trying to make more. And we built one line at a co-man, and within a year and a half, we had 5 lines running at full tilt. It was like, that was when, like, fully settled into me, like, never underestimate the laziness of the American consumer. We want easy. We want it to be just, I want it now. I want it simple. And we've got most households have 2 working people. Everybody's on the go. Everybody would rather invest in leisure time than food prep time. And, so all of those things, I think, just come into play, that our society is built for speed, and where there's no slowing it down. So, we have to recognize that reality. And, not to say there's nothing that people take a moment to sit down and slow down and enjoy. There is ritual around tea or coffee or other things, beer, whatever. But by and large, like, for the most part, people want easy and people want just plugins that work for them.
Yeah.
So, I think it's, again, really understanding your product. And if you think your product is something that's going to buck that convenience trend, you better really know why and how, and it needs to be built for that. But for the most part, easy is the way.
Either people want convenience for the day-to-day stuff, or it's like on the other side, it's like people and they have the free time, like making sourdough bread at home, when it's a lot of process, but it's like part of their hobby, if it's not like on either side of the barbell in between, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, sourdough, I think, this trend of this baking trend that's been amazing since COVID, really people one it's soothing. Baking is soothing. It's very like elemental, and you have to do it right. You have to pay attention. It takes your mind into the process. By sourdough also, like, now you've joined a tribe, right? You've joined a club. You're part of something. So I think that baking activity ticks a lot of those boxes for what people are looking from. And you're not baking that bread because you need it necessarily. You're probably not making sandwiches out of that to feed your kids in their lunchbox, right? So there's all those other things. And so, yeah, I agree. I think, being on the board at King Arthur, like, seeing this trend and seeing how people have embraced this is like taking that food making art and craft into a different kind of space
Yeah.
that's way different from why people buy most of their groceries.
Yeah, totally. In terms of optimizing supply chains, what are you seeing today? Like, what are the biggest opportunities in today's environment when it comes to reducing COGS?
It's hard. I mean, right now there's so many moving pieces. I think you really have to be thoughtful about what you're going to chase. I think one, on the tariff front, which everybody's talked about a lot the last year, we're seeing it settle down. It's a little more a sense of predictability. So now people are understanding, well, should I be changing my supply chain to account for tariffs or not? So that's one. That's kind of nibbling around the edges. I think the big pieces are, what's your manufacturing look like? And between you and your manufacturer, whether you own it or whether you outsource it, how can you do better? How do you work with your manufacturer to squeeze out some more efficiency? How do you reduce waste? How do you reduce overweights? So many products in their early part of their life cycle are very poorly designed for manufacturing. And a lot of founders just sort of delegate that to their co-man. The co-man is not that incentivized to make it better. They're just happy just to get through it every day and, send the product out to the customer. So, a collaboration with your manufacturing, I think, is where there's a lot of opportunity. You can, labor costs are way up. If you can reduce headcount by making your product run better, if you can get 10% more per shift out, those things add up and matter a lot. Optimizing your truckloads is your pallet configuration, right? If you can get 10 or 20% more on a pallet, you just shrunk your freight cost by 10 or 20%. So some of this stuff is actually like very simple from a math standpoint. Most founders are not that good at it. Most founders are not operationally minded. They're sales and marketing minded. They're creativity minded. So, that's where I think there's opportunity. And the other piece is not really on. Too many people think, well, as I get bigger, I'm just going to squeeze my suppliers and I'm going to get better pricing. In packaging, you get a lot of leverage from scale. On your ingredient side, you don't get that much leverage from scale, or at least like it's way different magnitude. If you're a $2 million company, worrying about sourcing better is probably a waste of time. But if you can formulate better and you can formulate in a more sophisticated way and you can reduce your cost of formulation, or you can reduce, 19 ingredients to 15, those kind of things end up paying off. So I think it takes a product by product, manufacturing process by process kind of look, but there's certainly, most small companies are leaving dollars on the table on the operation side. And too many brands, they look at their co-man transactionally and then they'll just say, hey, I want a lower price, and they make it the co-man's problem. And most co-mans are not that motivated, especially if you're a startup, to go do that work. But if you go to them and say, look, how do I partner with you? What do we need to do collectively to make your plant run better? How can, instead of implying that, hey, Mr. Co-man, I want to take money out of your pocket to put in my pocket, which is where a lot of people start, is this hard-headed negotiation of I win, you lose, or whatever. And you go, I don't want you to make any less money. How can we both make more money? And if you can get more product out per hour, the co-man is going to do better and you should get a price reduction. So I think that there's just not enough focus on emerging brands on true actual partnership and working together with your manufacturer and your suppliers to find ways to do better.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. In terms of finding the right contract manufacturing partner and getting production off the ground, it sounds like, you do a lot of this kind of search and building relationships with co-packers and making recommendations for your clients. Like what should a kind of a co-packer kind of diligence checklist look like? Or maybe just another way to put it, what are just the most important variables or factors to consider?
Yeah, it's interesting too because at JPG, like I've started, in addition to running JPG and launching brands and other stuff, I've started and operated two contract manufacturers. My head of co-man used to run his manufacturing plant. That's how I got to know him. He was one of my co-mans at Kashi. So we see both sides of the table, and I think I'll start with that. Is that when you're trying to find a partner, if you don't understand what they do and what's important to them and how they're motivated, it's very tough to have a partnership. So I think there's one is just taking the time to get to know each other a little bit. Hopefully you're making something that has more than one place in the world that can make it. And if so, then you need to find that best relationship. So that's partly all the basics of can they do it? Can they do it at a reasonable price? Do they have capacity? Is it the right fit? Also just that relationship piece that we see a lot of folks shortcut that or again look at it as too transactional. So I think the diligence needs to be both what are your MOQs and what kind of upside can I expect? If I 10x my business, can I work with you? Or am I going to outgrow you? It's also understanding that if you do 10x or 100x where you start with, you're probably not going to be at the same command, right? Like this whole idea that you're going to command for life from when you first get married. I used to say, look, you should not want to be a child bride. Like you are a very young nascent company. This is not your forever partner here. You're not getting married for life. You're going to have a good relationship for hopefully 2 to 5 years. And then hopefully you outgrow them and you go somewhere else. Like that's what success looks like. And you want to make that relationship as productive as possible during that time. So, understanding those parameters on volume, understanding cost, and then, how do you put together a contract that's fair and equitable and clear so that everybody knows how to behave?
On that topic, what's a red flag in a manufacturing, co-packer contract that maybe a good amount of founders may miss that could get them in trouble later down the line?
I mean, one big one is who owns the formula, who owns the IP. You as the founder of the brand, you need to own that. If you take the shortcut route and you have your manufacturer develop your product for you, they're probably going to own that IP. That might be okay. Almost every solution can be okay if you do the things around it right. So, but if you're going to go that route, you need to know what your buyout of that IP is. And either after so many units, you own it, or after so many months or years, you own it. There needs to be a pathway to ownership because, like I said, at some point, you're going to outgrow that partner. Bluntly, almost everybody who's giving you free R&D on the front end, they're charging you a lot for that R&D and the cost of your product. And at some point, you're going to come to us or some other competent ops team and they're going to say, I can save you 40%, but we need to move you somewhere else. And if you don't own the formula, it's much harder to do that. It costs you more paying us to reformulate it. So I think that's one is IP rights are really big and investors really don't like when you don't have your IP rights. Beyond that, I think it comes down to transparency. Like you should not have a 2-page co-man contract. That's woefully inadequate. You need something that's much more explicit in spelling out your rights, your responsibilities, and same with theirs. Because what we see is that a lot of contracts are just fine when everything goes perfectly. And then when something goes wrong, it all hits the fan and there's not clarity of who's at fault and how it works. And those are when brands often feel abused because the co-man's not going to just step in front of the bus when they don't have to. So you need a good contract that delineates if something's out of spec, then what happens? If there's a recall, then what happens? What do you have the right to reject or not? All those sort of things need to be clear. So it does take some intensity to have a good contract.
Yeah, that's really helpful. You work with a lot of brands across like all aspects of CPG, and in my sense is you definitely got a pretty good grasp on all things trends. And I think one thing I've heard you talk about is how is kind of macro versus micro trends and how founders and operators should really focus on the macro. Can you kind of expand on this and maybe kind of an examples of what macro examples and maybe micro examples that maybe would not be something that's worth pursuing?
Well, yes, we'll talk about that. And I'll start by also saying, I think this is where it's important to understand, are you building a $10 million profitable company or are you building a company you want to build and to scale and exit? And that's when you need to know the difference on if you're in a micro trend or macro, right? So if you want to build a $100 million company, you need to be operating in a market that's billions of dollars, because only 10% of a market is usually something you're not going to achieve, right? So you need to be looking at a market that's that can be very, very large. So one, I think that means, again, you look at, am I going too far? Am I trying to solve too many problems at once? Or can I just say, look, we're about high quality protein, or we're about protein and fiber, which makes it GLP-1 friendly, or we're about the benefits of mushrooms, or whatever it may be, but something that you believe has scale and that the market says has scale. It's not just your belief. There's some reason to believe in the scale. And then, building toward that with simplicity and with focus. Otherwise, look, there's a lot of good brands and good companies out there that are 10 or 20 million bucks that are really built on much more niche kind of positionings.
Sure.
So that to me is the big question. Is the micro trend can be very sustainable, maybe very highly ownable, but it may not scale ever or for 20 years. So it's really being honest with, we see people give us ridiculous TAMs with some very esoteric product, and they're like, yeah, but this could be $2 billion. Like, you can't show me a $4 million market today. But, come on. So, like, thinking about what your true TAM is and not some outrageous thing. But if you're selling a product that's very complex and nearly a medical food, well, chances are you're in that micro trend space. And, you need to just understand that when you start.
What categories do you feel like are especially maybe ripe for disruption right now? Or maybe another way to put it, if you were to go start your own brand this year, what category or maybe categories would you consider going after?
I think right now, obviously protein in everything is a big trend, but it's happening all over. I don't know that if I'm launching a new brand, I'm probably not going into that maelstrom. I think fiber and more sophisticated approaches to fiber is interesting. I think there's an opportunity, and this is where there's a lot of nuance. So we'll see how it unfolds. It's like, do you want to be a GLP-1 focused brand or not? It's a giant trend. It's only going to get bigger as those drugs become, oral instead of injectable, and they become affordable. I think there's opportunity to be GLP-1 friendly, and that means a lot of different things. There's a nutritional aspect, there's a right size aspect, there's a meeting the needs in different ways. And so far, there's been a lot of people kind of dance around the edges, but there's not been very many brands that go right after it. So that'll be interesting to watch. Gut health is another aspect of that I think continues to grow. And then the gut brain kind of connection and brain health. So we were seeing, in some ways, there's a lot of trends right now that are actually kind of coming together. And then, greens fees are, you got to be clean label. You got to be something that makes sense. I mean, if you're really medical, if you're really technical, maybe you can get by with being a little more, the miracle of food science kind of thing. But, for most brands that are probably, that are engaging broadly against the industry, you have to design from simple, and then you have to just really figure out which of these consumer needs you want to nail. But I would say, I would caution on, you don't want to be an arms race brand, right? You don't want to be just like, I have 1 more gram of protein. Well, somebody else will one up you. You want to be something that people rapidly affiliate with and understand, and feel like they need it in their life. You want to hit that bullseye. You want to have a clear bullseye, and you want to hit it, and you want to hit it very, very tightly and over again. All your messaging, communication, where you are on shelf, all of that needs to hold together. And you need to be working on that emotional hook to your consumer more so than just being structure function kind of position.
Totally. For the brands out there that they've struck lightning in a bottle, or it's been a 10-year overnight success, or somewhere in between, and they are or will soon to be in a place where they can seriously start looking at an exit, what should founders have top of mind as they're getting the business ready for sale and to market to potential acquirers?
I think this is also, you really need to understand what you're selling. And, if you're selling a really high growth brand and you've got really high growth and there's a reason that's going to continue, you don't need to be as profit focused, because everybody talks about profit these days, but it's very hard to get profit below 10 million. And then even for larger brands, you need to know what you're about. And, you not necessarily everything, even at 100 million, you're probably not 50 margin and 50% growth. And, like, those brands are really rare. So are you still like zooming to growth with a pathway to profitability, or better profitability? Or are you like, hey, look, we've proven we can turn out really solid margin and profitability and still grow at 25% a year? Like that's also viable. But, so I think that I would start with that as we see brands, sophisticated brands, sometimes with what you would think would be sophisticated advisors that still don't know what they're selling. At a 60 or 100 million, like you should know exactly what your proposition is and then what they're buying into. And depending on what that is, you also need to then have the rationale for, well, what's our innovation pipeline going forward, or what's our next lever toward profitability? How does a sale add value to the company? How do you help the strategic acquirer understand how they make it even better than it is today? So, I think that there's this, similar to what I said about co-mans before, you need to think about what that buyer is looking at. What value proposition are you giving them? Are you giving them growth that they can't get otherwise? Are you giving them a business that's maybe a little bit more mature, that's profitable and really solid, but still has legs that they can see how they can go expand the growth? They can get you into channels you can't get in. So thinking about, well, if I had the wherewithal of Pepsi or a Mars or whoever the acquirer might be, what should happen with this business, and laying it out for them so they can see it. And, big companies like that, they're going to look pretty hard at your brand and your proposition and see if they think they believe in it or not. So you're way beyond the point of selling some irrational promise. You need to actually have something that they look at and go, yeah, I buy into that. And in the back of their mind, they usually have some other twist that they think they can apply to make it even better. So those are the deals that get done.
Cool. That makes sense. That's really powerful. Well, yeah, Jeff, this has been awesome. Really appreciate the time. I think this has been really valuable for a lot of people that are going to be listening. What's the best place for people to follow along with you and all the knowledge you've got, and then best place to follow along with everything going on at JPG these days?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be updating our website some more, and there'll be content coming on there at times. So it's jpgresources.com. And then also, JPG Resources on LinkedIn. Our Culinex team also does a really nice job on LinkedIn and talking about food and more of a culinary perspective. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So, we don't do too much other social. So for the most part, LinkedIn and our website are where you're going to find us. And then at events, I'm speaking this week at Fancy Foods, and we participate in all the big shows, and happy to meet people in person.
Cool. Awesome. Well, appreciate the time, Jeff. This has been awesome.